Before we get started, there's something I have to share with you, beautiful people. If you're listening, you probably do like your cinema from all across the globe, and I think I've got something that's going to be right up your alley. There's this new streaming service. It's called Film Movement Plus, and it opens up a world of award-winning entertainment, including some of the best films from around the globe, and that is the truth. Among the hundreds of titles that there are waiting for your discovery, and there are hundreds of titles, it's really a rich and fantastic service. There's some of the best stuff from 2020 as well. Stuff like Wild Goose Lake, which we cannot recommend enough, and things like Zombie Child, which played festivals, and there's so much more, and there's a lot of really great stuff. You can find the app for it on your Roku, on your Apple TV, or on your Amazon Fire, not to mention on your laptop, desktop, as well as any sort of mobile devices. And Film Movement Plus is a measly $5.99 a month. It is a great deal, but as a listener of our podcast, and we got a treat for you. If you sign up today for Film Movement Plus, we're going to give you a 30-day free trial, plus the next 3 months at 50% off when you use the promo code SEATS. That is a fantastic, fantastic deal. If you love foreign cinema, I cannot recommend that enough. Sign up today at filmmovementplus.com or follow the link that we have provided on the podcast or on the YouTube link below to click through and get watching today.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Every once in a while, you find a movie that you just can't help but gush about, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more, as always. My name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain on current projects, influences, state of the industry, all that sort of fun stuff. And we do it in a light and conversational fashion, just because that's how we like to do it. And if you like how we do it, we'd love it if you subscribe to our podcast. You can find us basically wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, it's all good. And you can find every single one of our episodes archived over at our YouTube channel. Also, we'd love it if you'd follow us on social media. You can do that over at Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and dare I say most importantly, would you do us the kindness of giving us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest movie news, reviews, and even a little bit of television, but basically the moving image in general, because that's what we love to talk about. And we hope that you like reading about it, because we love finding movies to recommend to you. And boy, do we have one for you. It's called Rose Plays Julie. It's hitting VOD now and select virtual cinemas in the United States. And it is an absolute powerhouse from our friends at Film Movement. It is an Irish film, and it's really this very intimate exploration of a person's identity and sort of the trauma that people can go through and the power that it'll have over them as this young woman tries to find her birth mother. And inadvertently, she triggers a string of events that really change both of their lives. It is a powerful piece of work, and it plays almost like a stage play with three brilliant actors: Anne Skelly, Orla Brady, and Aidan Gillen, who all do fantastic work in this one. And it is from the writing-directing duo of Joe Lawlor and Christine Molloy. And we got the distinct pleasure to sit down with them and talk about this film. And we really went into it just in terms of sort of influences and how they got the ball rolling on this, and just sort of their techniques and the kind of stories that they like to tell. This is a very sort of intricate kind of film where you can see sort of the wheels turning in the characters, and nothing's done very overtly. It's all done very psychologically, and it is an absolute powerhouse of a film that we just cannot recommend enough. And I hope you enjoy our talk with Joe and Christine, because I certainly know that I did, and we've got more on this movie coming even later today, so stay tuned.
You're so welcome, and thanks for the interest in our film and the interest in talking to us. So.
Well, thank you for making a wonderful film. That feels like a good place to start off, because I was so struck by this film. I mean, I can't remember the last time I saw something that, especially in this genre, that felt so very, I'm looking for the right word, because I mean, there's emotion to it, obviously, but there was a real coldness and sort of calculated sort of feel to the pain of it all. And I'm kind of curious, for both of you, could you walk me through sort of the inspiration for wanting to not only tell this story, but tell it in this particular way?
Well, the formal aspect of it is something a little bit more mysterious to us as well. Whereas I think when we get on to the starting point of the inspiration, we can talk about that with a little bit more objectivity. In a way, I suppose how something is expressed is really critical. So from our point of view, I guess one of the things that we like about film and art in general is how it's done, not just what it is, but how it's expressed. And in a way, maybe it's 50-50, or maybe actually what I'm particularly really interested in is it's how it's done. Maybe it's 80-20 ultimately at the end of the day. So I guess from that perspective, you have a story or an idea or a block of content, and you're trying to find different ways to express that. And a lot of that comes down to how the performer might embody the character and how you might direct that actor to perform that. So I remember there was one particular scene where it's a scene kind of very deep into it when Orla's character, Ellen, visits Rose in her halls of residence in the university where she's studying. And, she's looking around the room, and they're both, and Anne, who plays Rose, says to her, doesn't it worry you that he's out there walking around as if nothing has taken place? And I remember when the actors were launching into that dialogue, they performed it in a very different way. And it was a sort of an unusual way that they had done it, but not in a way that we necessarily liked. I mean, they were performing it in a very friendly way, and we liked it much more chilled and much more colder, if you will, that it's a little bit more like a chess game between the two of them. And that was a very rare moment where the actors were kind of trying to warm the characters up. But we realized in our conversation, because it's very good to give actors the opportunity to just run the scene before you interfere too much, it just felt wrong. And the more clinical approach, the more circumspect approach, or the more chess-like way of playing the scene felt much more relevant, or much more in keeping with the tone of the whole film, which in a way is a little bit forensic in any way. Okay, we have people who are archaeologists who map out landscapes and go at things in a rather methodical way. And similarly, you have with the veterinary science student, where there's methodologies involved. And so there's a kind of a precision. And actors also dissect emotions to some degree in order to her work. So it's mapped out and parsed in a way that people can manage. So I don't know, we're very drawn to the camera being slightly forensic in its movements, that things creep forward, that they're a little bit more analytical. And there's a sort of a psychology in terms of how it's seen might be played out, but also how the camera might be used in that it's not trying to be a piece of social realism, that it's trying to have a much cooler strip, for want of a better term. So, but beyond that, it's very hard to know why we approach it like that. I mean, we'd have to lie down in the psychiatrist's couch for that one in a way. but we're also drawn to films, oddly enough. I mean, we love Robert Bresson, for example,
Right.
or Michael Haneke, or Kelly Reichardt. We're very drawn to films which also are not any less emotional, but it's just that little bit more forensic. But why? I do not know. Maybe we're frustrated detectives at heart. That that's what we should have done all along.
I love that answer though, and I love those names that you brought up, because I definitely got a lot of feel from your film from those names as well. And I mean, I'm kind of curious because this is such a methodical sort of chess dance almost between these three characters. And walk me through a little bit just in terms of, I guess, the struggles of casting and trying to find the right three to sort of be able to play off each other. Because I mean, especially in a film like this with this kind of dynamic, if you don't have the right three people, it's not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, our biggest task was to cast the part of Rose. So to find the actress who's going to play Rose. And I think we believed and felt and knew that a lot would just flow from the actress who we brought on board and how she's going to approach that role. And to add to what Joe said earlier, we like internalized worlds, and we love watching people on screen thinking and processing. So even a lot of the emotions are internalized, they're inside. And, you know, you need a face that is really expressive on the scene, on the screen, without necessarily having to do a huge amount. And I think it's difficult to find an actor like that. But that's what we set out to do. And, you know, we went through the process. And actually, this is the first time, although it's our fourth feature film, it's the first time we've ever worked with the casting director. So the process for us was very interesting. I mean, we've worked with non-actors in the past as well as professional actors, but we haven't been through that, you know, more traditional casting process. So, you know, being able to get a self-tape to begin with and just go back and engage with the self-tapes again and again to start forming an opinion and beginning to imagine an actress as your character. But it's a really useful process because it helps you then to come up with a short list of actresses who you want to meet face to face, which you almost have to. I mean, definitely for this role, we had to. And when we met Anne, it was, well, lots of things. It's her, she's very captivating, and the camera loves her. She's got, I think, an incredibly mesmerizing screen presence. She's very open, she's warm, but at the same time, she wears the mask very well. And the conversation we had with Anne when we met her in the flesh, you know, we just knew that she would, I mean, it's not like the other actresses who we met couldn't do the role. They absolutely could, but we knew that Anne was the absolutely right person for the role. And it kind of flowed from there. You know, we hang out with her a lot in the film. The film in some ways is quite quiet, and you know, the camera's on her face a lot, and we're trying to understand her because she's a mystery not only to us, but she's a mystery to herself, really, a puzzle to be solved. And for Aidan and Orla, the process was different because once we had that the biggest, most important part of the jigsaw puzzle was in place, we knew of Orla Brady, but we didn't know her very well. We'd never met her. And actually, contrary to what I've just said, meeting Orla in the flesh, face to face, was not on the cards. So it had to be through Skype. But again, Orla had the script. And when you talk to somebody about something that you've been very close to for a very long time, and then you give it over to somebody else and you hear what they have to say back to you, it can be such a great moment. And with Orla, the conversation we had with her on Skype that day completely, you know, helped us to make that decision. It was just such an easy decision to make. And, you know, for us, it was great to work with Orla, to have had that opportunity. And Aidan we've worked with before, so that was pretty straightforward. He read the script, he liked us, and because we worked with Aidan before, we felt that he could bring that kind of inherent charm that he has. And we wanted to stick with that, not to flip it and really he's a monster in disguise. Yes, he is, but he never becomes a monster. He doesn't have a hidden basement with lots of, you know, weird implements of torture.
Right.
He is a narcissist. He is one of those men who have breezed through life, one of those people who breezed through life, and nothing's ever come back to haunt him. There's never been any, payback. He got away with raping Ellen and moved on with his life, but actually he didn't reckon on somebody like Rose turning up. But we wanted Aidan to be both ordinary and charming. He's a narcissist who can keep a lid on us, and he just is one of those lucky people, but actually obviously his luck, horrible, nasty piece of work, but his luck runs out eventually.
I'm curious, do you get, like, especially when dealing with sort of Anne and Orla, like, do you get a lot of time in advance to read with them? Because I was so struck by, like you said previously, like, this isn't a film that's making a social statement. This is a film where we're seeing the characters and we're seeing their wheels turn. And I was so struck just seeing the evolution of the story, how it went from Anne's character just trying to find Orla's character, but how it became so much more as it all unfolded and went along.
Yeah, I think it's trying to kind of work with actors or give them that kind of space to define the role, because you can only do that up to a certain point. And you get actors like Aidan who don't like to rehearse, and that's okay. You don't have to rehearse. But one thing everybody has to understand is what we imagine the characters are like, or, so you can take that away. Ideally, the script should give you everything that you need. Now that it sounds easier said than done, but in one sense, if you read the scene between Aidan and Orla in the car, for example, at the very end, which is the only time they ever share the screen together, and it's the only time they're ever in the film. Now, interestingly, we thought it might be a useful moment that Orla's character would meet for the very first time Aidan's character, and we thought it would be interesting to have in reality the two actors do this for real as well, that they had met each other several years before, but we thought it would be at an interesting tension if the very first time we ever played that scene, they actually did it on camera for the very first time. And that was kind of an interesting thing to do. And they were very up for it, although obviously it can bring its own anxiety, because if you rehearse in advance, you kind of set the parameters a bit more. And when you don't know what the parameters are, anything can happen, but a kind of an energy comes in and a tension comes in. But also you're hoping an error or mistake might take place, because actors like to, like most people, like to control the scene that they're in. And when things aren't fully in control, it can be kind of exciting to allow that to happen. But a degree of trust they need to trust us, and obviously we need to trust them. And watching errors and watching mistakes and watching an actor sort of being slightly out of control or out of their comfort zone is a kind of delicious place to have an actor. And you don't often get to be in that situation. But effectively, it's to try and understand the world and to allow the actor to do their work. But what's very important is that they understand the tone of the film that we're trying to get across. And I guess the best thing to do is, as I said, is to refer to certain films or to look at some of our earlier work so they can have a better sense of the kind of tone or pacing. So we're not looking necessarily for naturalism, or the rhythm we're looking for is maybe 20% slower than you might apply in your everyday life. And equally, the camera might move a little bit slower than what it might necessarily do in a piece of social realism or a piece of naturalism, because the experience of watching can sometimes be, as you say, we're not here to put home a message. We're not necessarily talking about the social issue of sexual violence, although that's obviously part of it. It's also about how this has been put across. So, for example, we're not here to debate whether a rape took place or not. that's a given. I mean, that is often in reality up for debate. It certainly is in this country, in the UK, where crimes of sexual violence are, depressingly low in terms of conviction rates. So we didn't want to have to discuss any of that. It was a given. And we wanted to look at more complicated psychological issues. So we wanted to kind of bypass the judicial system and look at these more complex issues to do with justice in terms of how somebody who perceives himself to be a victim deals with that, but also how sexual violence has a intergenerational impact, that actually the child, the outcome of this event also is a victim, and they also can need to find redress in this situation. So in a sense, it's kind of an unusual approach to the subject matter, but we wanted to express it in a way that felt right for us as well. Sorry, that was a slightly long-winded.
No. It was the perfect answer, because I mean, I think you're right. I mean, the sort of quiet, awkward tension that the film has really is sort of the statements of the facts and the reality of the situation. And I mean, I'm curious because I've got to imagine that's a hard energy to sustain when you're shooting. I mean, for both of you, does sort of maintaining sort of that, I guess, unique energy sort of force you both to pull sort of new tricks out of your creative bag, especially when you're in the moment trying to shoot?
Yeah, it's funny for us. It's what we want and what we're going after, and so it's the job at hand, and we have a sense of where that's going because we also edit the film. Well, yeah, we edit our own films as well, so we know what we need and where we need to steer things. But I think for the actors and for the crew as well, trying to get into that space in the first few days can be a bit of a challenge, to settle into us. And the anecdote that Joe had earlier about Orla and Anne in that scene in her, room on the campus, where they just wanted a bit of light relief. It's like, can we not just, do the chats and relax and have a warm, cozy encounter between these two characters? And we played it out and it was fun, but of course they knew as well that it's just not going to, it's not what the film was about. They absolutely knew that, but they wanted to do it for themselves as actors, I think, because it is hard and it's tough. Because when a lot of the emotion is internalized, and when there's, I guess the film is quite, chilly isn't the word I would use, but it's very disciplined and it's reined in a lot. And to maintain that over the 4-week shoot can be a bit of a challenge. But I think you can get into the rhythm of it reasonably quickly. We get everybody on board, like our DOP who we were working with for the first time. There is a kind of a way and an approach to filming where it's all about coverage. I mean, we know all about that and setting up the shots and, a very particular kind of way. But our approach has always been to try and know what the shot is and put the energy into going for that rather than creating options. Because if you're about creating options, you probably don't really know what you want. And anyway, in a low budget shoot over a very short period of time, when you've barely have a minute to spare, you need to really know what you're looking for and to go after that. But you need to get that right with the DOP and set up the parameters and understand each other from the beginning. And Tom, who we worked with, Tom Comerford, was brilliant. But maybe the first couple of days where we needed to bed down our ideas with him on location, which isn't ideal, but we absolutely got there and he did a great job, I think.
Well, and I love that you bring that up, because that's another thing that I was so struck by, because from a visual standpoint, especially in relation to the characters, there were some moments that were very intense and very close and very personal. But then there were others where it felt, the world felt very cavernous and they felt so small inside this world. And I like, how big was it for you to sort of try to give that balance of not just the intensity of the emotion of the moment, but also being lost in this other world of the pain that all these characters are feeling.
Well, I think the scenes, the old adage that a good scene is usually more than about just one thing. And so I guess we like contemplative films, and we, as Christian was saying, this idea of watching actors think is important. And so one doesn't necessarily need an actor to emote in a large way, because this isn't a theater, for example. It's a camera. It is a recording instrument, which is inherently forensic. So the tiniest of little things. Now, of course, I'm talking about watching the human face on a large screen. It's been a year since the film has been seen on a large screen, and one wonders how much can be picked up on the small screen. But I think you can pick up a lot on the small screen, because we do get in there. So you're asking actors to be sensitive to the burden that they're carrying, and also trying to conceal. So they're trying not to give away too much. And so how do you do that? Well, I suppose what we do is we trust and rely on intelligent actors to know what that is.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I've seen myself in front of a camera and it's dreadful. So you look at then great performances and you think, it's quite a thing to do very little and to do a lot at the same time. And I suppose the art is really to choose intelligent actors who are really good at what they do. And so in a scene which is fundamentally quite delicate, and where there's a concealing or a lying going on, or a desire not to disturb, or I'm thinking off the top of my head in the scene again with Rose and Ellen in the forest, when she breaks the news to her that she was raped. Now you can imagine that scene could get played in all kinds of highly emotional, scene-chewing ways, and that might be very good and done very well. But equally, what's not so common, but has for our minds just as much validity and has just as much power, is that it's underplayed. And the sheer, the coming out of the banal fact, I was raped, and stating it, and just to watch the human reaction to that, and for the human reaction not to be, dialed up to 10, and to have it, to watch somebody trying to contain it and keep it right down, and watch that struggle, we think that has an enormous amount of power to it as well, if you can do it, if you can nail it. Now, of course, if you're trying to get an actor to do that, and they can't, maybe then you panic and you think, okay, well, let's have the number 10 operatic version, because a lot of actors are trained in that.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to get actors to be trained down at the 1, 2s, and 3s levels. That's a different kind of a skill. And for our money, a lot of great actors, that's really what makes them great, as opposed to merely very good, is that they can perform something very small and subtle, and for it equally to carry a power. And again, we're very drawn to that. And when we see acting way up off the scale, it can be very painful to watch.
But it can be good
sometimes.
as well.
Well, sometimes we enjoy it, of course we can. But often the films that do stand out for us are the ones that are at the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add, in relationship to your question, that a recurring line in our script was really about a figure being alone in the landscape, so the camera pulling back and somebody's alone. And in a way, these three characters are orbiting around each other. And every so often we get to see them from a distance, and we get to see their small scale in this bigger landscape and on this much bigger canvas. And for us, that was really important to remind ourselves that the three of them are obviously bound together and connected by this act of violence, but they're having to process and live in the world completely on their own. So they're apart. And I guess the other element of the film is the slow coming together of Ellen and Rose as a kind of a love story between a mother and a child. So rather than that, love that a parent has for their child from the moment they're born, this is something that has to be learned and they have to work towards. But yeah, an enduring image for me, cinema image, is in Barbara Loden's film Wanda, when you see Wanda walking in her white coat through the slag heaps.
Oh,
and
God,
she's
yeah.
a tiny figure. And, that idea of the character being on their own, this is the journey that we're going to go with. And you can see somebody in this much bigger landscape kind of dwarfed by us, is a very resonant and powerful image. And I guess we wanted moments in the film where somebody is kind of slightly swallowed up by the landscape, and also moments of real intimacy where we're close with people, particularly the scene with Ellen and Peter at the end of the film when they're in the car. So moving between that, yeah. So
I love that you brought up Wanda, because it is one of those films that really has this very contemplative power to it, and it's not like you were saying before, it's a lot of the energy is at a 1 or a 2. It's not necessarily played to the 9s or the 10s. And I'm kind of curious, for both of you as filmmakers, is it those kind of film? Like I always like to ask, what was sort of the origin film for a filmmaker, to like what sort of inspired them to sort of get into the business? And just by seeing your films and you mentioning Wanda, I can definitely see sort of a through line of sort of the things that really inspired the both of you.
Well, if I answer first, a film for me, and I'd have to bring you all the way back to Dublin in the 70s, maybe late 70s, early 80s, where cinema used to be curated on television much more, certainly here in the UK. And myself and my sister would stay up late at the weekends when my mom and dad went around to the pub, which all parents, or so many parents did, particularly, in the suburbs in Dublin. That was the done thing. And there was a season of, I guess, French New Wave films, but I wouldn't have known that at the time. And there's a film that had such a powerful effect on me. And I only realized years later what film it was. And it was Maurice Pialat's film, A Mouth Agape. And it so happened that when we eventually saw that film, all these years later, myself and Joe, we both realised that we had both seen that screening in different parts of Dublin on that same night all those years ago. And we both remembered so many details of the film. It was so impactful. It didn't make me think, oh, I want to make films, but it certainly awoke me to the power of those images on the screen. And that has absolutely stayed with me for all of my life.
Yeah, I think for me, I would quite comfortably oscillate, from obviously American films like Alan J. Pakula that we've been rewatching again. Remember watching Clute when I was younger, and then watching it recently again, thinking, oh my God. And watching Jane Fonda's performance, I'm thinking, what an incredible performance she gave. And you don't often see performances quite like that. So it was a reminder of a way of being in the space or in front of the camera that you don't often see. It's sort of sublime in a way. But of course, growing up in the, I can't remember much of the 60s, obviously. Not because I was taking drugs, David, you understand, it was simply being too young. But so it was in the 70s, really, things began to kind of operate on a more subliminal, dreamlike way. And then we see work like Antonioni or Fellini or Jean-Pierre Melville. And so you'd be engaging with that kind of work. And I suppose it's a bit like listening to the music that you first listen to. You never quite shake off the aesthetic of that or the impact of that. And maybe that sort of bled into our systems. But the idea specifically of making films would be inconceivable that you could ever imagine making an actual film. Like, how would you get access to a camera, for example? None of that was even remotely possible, even in the 80s. And so the very first thing that we were sort of half thinking of or began to make incursions into was theatre. That's really, it was music, it was literature, it was theatre. These were the inroads. And it was only latterly, having made numbers of pieces of theatre, that you began to work with the tools of cinema, that you could access cameras and editing, because it felt very much way out of reach in the way that it isn't now.
Yeah.
And so that's just a different. My sense is that, having been in a band in the early 80s in Dublin, the equivalent for me is that I see a lot of young people wanting to make films now, just as much as being in a band and making music. At least in a band you could do it, but the idea of making a movie back in the early 80s, forget about it. Yeah. But you'd watch them and they would seep into your dreams and seep into your system, and you're thinking about life. And I think those 60s and 70s American and French films had a profound effect on me.
Well, I love that answer. And I mean, I think Rose Plays Julie is going to be one of those inroads for somebody, because it is such an intense, but yet thoughtful and really sort of, like, it's one of those movies you can't look away from, even though it's not happening in sort of the big dramatic flourishes that maybe you'd expect. And it's a brilliant little piece of work. And I just want to say thank you both for the time today. This was an absolute pleasure. And congratulations again on the film. I loved it.
David, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.